This is every Minecraft feature that needed to change, starting with this unfortunate mistake with squids. If you think milking a mushroom to get stew is weird, you might want to sit down. Since back in the early days of Minecraft, there used to be a glitch where if you took a bucket to a squid, you could actually get squid milk. Now, it wasn't a separate item called squid milk, and it definitely wasn't ink, but there must have been something that went wrong with the code for when they added this to cows that also let you milk squids. I didn't know people eat squid ink and pasta, but something about squilk just sounds gross. And I'm guessing the health inspector had them change this. In the snapshots for 1.20, there existed a glitch where if you had a chiseled bookshelf that was already filled with books, and then you clicked it with another book that was in your hand, then you could duplicate that book of your choice as much as you wanted to. Which was great if you didn't have yourself a mending villager, which is probably the most useful bookshelves have ever been in the game. And of course, that's why it got patched out. Back in snapshot 21W05A, Mojang accidentally made a block that was stronger than bedrock. Because if you were to use bone meal in a drip leaf plant that you planted underneath some bedrock, then it was fully capable of destroying that block as well as plenty others, such as enchanting tables or beacons. Which is just great. It's strong enough to break those things, but it's not strong enough to hold a feather. But Minecraft's never made sense, even with features that stay in the game. If you were to type this seed into Minecraft snapshot 21W11A, then on the surface, everything would look fine. But it was underground where things got a little wonky. Since down here, the bone blocks that were supposed to generate in this fossil generated a little too much, and unfortunately that meant that it overrode with the bedrock blocks of the floor, meaning that if you broke a few ribs, you could actually get yourself down to the void in survival. But outside of the novelty, there's really no point to going down to the void, so it's for the best that this got patched out. And just 2 snapshots after they'd ruined the overworld, Mojang then went on in 21W13A to also ruin the End Island. Since when you came through to fight the Ender Dragon, you noticed that the End Island generation was completely broken. All we had was a massive lump of endstone, and you couldn't even find the towers or the dragon if you wanted to. So I guess that makes your fight a little easier, but a lot more anticlimactic. And it was fixed shortly after. In 1.16, if you were to use an auto clicker as the dragon begins to perch down in the end fountain, then the dragon's breath that it shoots out would be expanded into a much larger radius. Which at first glance seems pretty bad. The dragon's breath's pretty deadly, so why would you ever do this? Well, the reason you try this is that if you had an auto clicker getting you full of glass bottles, then that meant that you had plenty of dragon's breath to use in your lingering potions. Which for those of us on Java who don't have the ability to make tipped arrows with a cauldron, this was about the best that we had. Though emphasis on the word had. It's not in the game anymore. In Bedrock Edition, it's possible to waterlog doors, which apparently the code took to mean that there's some leftover water hidden in the door. And you can see as much from this Reddit user's discovery, which is that if you stood at the edge of the corner in Bedrock Edition and flipped the door back and forth, you'd notice that the bubbles would start to appear over your hunger bar, which sure enough meant that we were able to drown ourselves inside of a door with no water in sight. Which makes it even more ironic that on Java Edition, we're able to use the doors to stop ourselves from drowning, which honestly, I prefer over the alternative. As user T-Pupper showed off on Reddit, back in the snapshot of 19W42A, there was a glitch where if you planted a tree on a dirt block, and then had another dirt block at any height above that tree sapling, then when you bone mealed the tree, it would grow on the block above instead. And folks, there was no limit to the amount of gap that we could have here. Getting some really peculiar sights if you decided to plant your tree on the bottom level of the floor. You'd get that tree, but it would be up in the mountains. Now, if only you had some wood to make some ladders to reach the tree, then you'd be solved. Snapshot 22W17A was a buggy mess. And not only for the fact that you couldn't use your skin in this update, you were just stuck to Alex, but rather when you looked inside of the creative mode menu, you noticed that in each of the different tabs where the blocks are supposed to be, that goat horns would also appear in every single one. And we've shown off mods that have goat horn blocks in the past, but something tells me that was never a planned feature from Minecraft. And the next snapshot after would prove that, when both of these were patched out. There's a lot of debates over whether birch logs are ugly, and while I don't want to weigh in on those, I will say that snapshot 20W28A didn't do you any favors. Since back then, there was a very weird bug when it came to birch trees, where when you'd load up your world, the birch trees would spawn in a square formation in every birch forest, creating this really unnatural sight. And I get that Minecraft's a game made out of squares and cubes, but this might just be pushing it too far. If you go through another portal, you're usually expecting to see that nausea warbly effect to it. But in snapshot 19W39A, the nausea effect got even more sickening. Instead, what happened is that you go through the portal and your screen would just pan up and down, which was really disorienting, and not in the way that Mojang intended, I don't think. Sometimes the past is very different from how you remember it, but even factoring the Mandela effect, I swear that Minecraft 1.9 never looked like this when I played it. And unfortunately, now when you go to boot up Minecraft 1.9 in the standard Minecraft launcher, you'll instead be greeted to the sight of everything looking completely broken. The text in the chat will be off, textures look weird, parts of the world are just missing, but luckily when you play this version through other third-party launchers, those tend to fare a little better. In the early versions for the Caves and Cliffs update, it was possible to use a damaged anvil to duplicate all of your items. All you need to do is fill up your inventory with filler blocks so that there's only one space left for the item you want to duplicate, and then continuously rename that item through the anvil until it eventually breaks, and then you'll find out that the item itself will be duplicated. And while you could do this with a single item, you're going to get your better returns if you used a shulker box instead, since there you could have a potential of 27 times the items you're duplicating. And hey, shulker boxes weren't always renewable either, so this solved 2 problems at once. Or if your Mojang caused 2 problems because it was never seen in later updates. And very similar to when we were growing our trees in the wrong place, in the later snapshot of 20W21A, if you did that same trick as earlier with a larger tree, it would not only grow above, but it would also place the dirt underneath the tree when it generates, giving you a top shelf tree and some extra dirt to boot. You're just gonna have to look at this eyesore to get it. Did you know you can kill the Ender Dragon with just 1 end crystal? It's crazy, but follow this out. Since back in 1.17, if you booted up a super flat world, and if you brought an end crystal to the end with you as you went through the portal, and then placed down that same crystal on the obsidian platform that you spawn in, it would just kill the Ender Dragon instantly. Which is weird. I thought those crystals were used for bringing it back to life. But nope, on a super flat world, I guess it just makes it super flatline. You've heard the saying when pigs fly, but how about striders? And sure enough, back in snapshot 20W14A, if you used a fishing rod to pull up a strider into the air and then jumped on it, it would just float in place. And then you could even ride it and move around while it's floating. And even though that got patched out, there is still a way to make your strider float. If you jump off a cliff with a couple of warp funguses on a stick, then when you scroll through them, the strider glitches out and it slowly descends down the fall. Minecraft cats haven't always looked this way. And I'm not talking about new textures, but rather removing some textures. Since strangely enough, in snapshot 20W45A, the cats that you'd see walking around appeared to have lost their legs. Which, hey, that's some great representation for 3-legged cats. But it was also most certainly a bug. And that's why this got fixed when it reached the bug tracker. And I guess the only tripod we have left is the one in the Education Edition. Hanging roots aren't a very useful item, but Mojang must have thought they were pretty important, since back in the first pre-release for Minecraft 1.17, there was a very strange visual bug where if you threw out the hanging roots, it would render at the same size as the item when placed down on the ground, which made it dwarf every other item they would throw on the ground. And when you look at this, it sure does seem important, but when you actually place down the item, not as much. In this snapshot, if you were to die when you respawned, then what would happen is that you would actually be put into this weird purgatory state between survival and spectator mode. And if that already wasn't existential enough, you could also kill yourself by simply punching, given a death message that would say that you were killed by you, with the player's name there and everything. And honestly, dying was the most interesting thing you could do back then. Since you weren't able to move, you could only place down certain blocks, and you were not able to break free. So yeah, I'll stick to punching. For a brief time in Minecraft, the deadliest mob in the game happened to be a falling block. Yeah, doesn't look too intimidating here, but back in snapshot 18W31A, there was a peculiar bug where if you dropped a falling block on top of a mob, for some reason that would cause the mob to sink into the ground. And unfortunately, we weren't any safer, since if a player was squashed by a falling block, you would just fall through every other block in the world, including bedrock, and then die in the void. The only ones who were safe were shulkers, and maybe that means their shells are better for armor than we thought. Prior to version 1.18, if you were to put down a composter and sit inside of it, then if you used a piston or a falling block to collide with your head, that would squish us into the composter, and that would glitch out the hitbox so that we could see all of the world around you, giving us the infamous composter x-ray glitch. And while it doesn't look like the kind of x-ray that you'd get banned on servers for using, it's still very useful if you wanted to track down the caves they need to light up. And like all useful things, it's no longer in Minecraft anymore. Back in Minecraft Alpha, Ethos Lab figured out that if you placed a cactus in a 4x4 area, and then water next to each cactus, then when you placed down a boat, it would break and duplicate the wood, making this one of the earliest duplication glitches ever found in Minecraft. And even if 1.9 looks pretty bad, it still couldn't beat the most broken version of the game to ever exist, which came out during Minecraft's in development phase back in 2010 on February 27th. And in this broken mess, all of the game was stripped down to the bare bones. The most that you were given was a weird obsidian compass that would spawn into the world, since when you tried to break blocks to pick them up, you wouldn't get the item. But even if you could, the only other item that you could get in the game was dandelions. So, it's a good thing the game wasn't released like this. I don't think it would have been as big of a seller. Water in the Nether is not supposed to exist, which then makes it funny that it's existed in so many different versions of the game. And the easiest glitch to pull off might have just been back in beta 1.8. Since here, if you managed to have some ice blocks, then when you placed them down, it would melt in the Nether, and then there you go. you had yourself a water source block, which could then turn the rest of the nether into a much safer place. I'll always prefer obsidian over lava. Do you remember the Minecraft update where Mojang deleted Minecraft? Yeah, it sounds silly, but back in the beta version for 1.1, if you launched Minecraft, everything would seem to be normal, except for when the game actually launched and you would see that there was no text anywhere. Yep, all of the Minecraft font completely gone. Even in-game, all of the item names have completely disappeared, and you also couldn't see the item quantity, which is made particularly bad by the fact that the early textures were pretty tough to make out. So if you didn't have text to guide your hand, who's to say what any of these actually were? And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?